Great. So I think it's time to start. I actually discovered that we have speaking certificates.
Oh, great.
Yes, I can give you one for the last session. Thank you very much.
And also some presents here we can take with us.
Oh, excellent. So it's a bit self-organized session. Good afternoon. My name is BAIBA KAŠKINA. I'm the general manager of CERT.LV. I have one slot in this responsible disclosure track. Since we are... So, which one would it be? No. This one. Excellent. Since it's a small audience, well, I'll try to talk about things that I think are interesting and maybe not to stick to this agenda too much. I don't think there are many that are not really familiar with CERT.LV, so I will not spend much time on that. Just to show that as a national and governmental team of Latvia, we are in the center of cybersecurity issues here. There is no another state institution that are in charge of practical aspects of IT security, and that's why everything comes to our direction. Even if our name says that we are related to security incidents, in fact, our scope of activities is much, much wider. And well, I'm not going to go into all the examples, but it includes even some certifications, it includes even things that are really outside the work of scope of certs. For responsible disclosure, okay, maybe I'll talk about that later, but well, we are in the center, that's an important message. What is responsible disclosure? Again, Chris has been talking about that quite a lot in the previous session, as well as other speakers, so I will not go through definitions. But there was another event at the beginning of October where I was trying to think how can I explain it in a very short, very simple way, like if you have half a minute, how do you explain it? And I think that this crucial element is that if somebody finds a vulnerability, he has multiple choices what to do with it. And all those choices have consequences. They have consequences for they can have consequences for the researcher, they can have consequences for the company or information system or vendor that is running the system in question. They can have consequences for society, etc., etc. And the only way which allows to minimize the damage and to have as few negative consequences as possible is if the researcher goes to the owner of the information system or the vendor, tells about the problem, and then they together try to solve the problem. They have enough time to solve it before it goes further, before it gets public. So that's why we actually talk about all this, and that's why we care. What I will talk more about in my talk is where are we with responsible disclosure in Latvia, what is the situation, and where do we want to get, and more emphasis on getting somewhere. The current situation, of course, we've been talking about responsible disclosure already for some time, but implemented it is in one commercial organization, which is Swedbank, and Edgar Znots will tell you all about their experience in the next presentation. At CERT.LV we also published our responsible disclosure policy, encouraging people if they find some vulnerabilities in our resources to come forward. And of course we felt that we have to show this example. But nevertheless, even if there are no official published responsible disclosure policies for other sectors, for other state institutions, it is happening. And it's happening already for 5-6 years, as long as we are in play. CERT.LV in its shape exists 5.5 years, And since the beginning, since the first year, there are cases of responsible disclosure, more or less responsible, let's say, but they happen all the time, and somehow we have managed to gain the trust of people involved, that they do share this information with us and involve us in coordination of solving these problems. And we are very grateful for that. We know that trust comes at, it's not easy to get it, and it comes with high price. So it's really a privileged situation to which we have worked historically, that we could have been involved in those cases. Those that are mentioned here are perhaps most loudly heard of. One was related with our EID software. It was found at the end of last year. A researcher found it accidentally, let's say. They were contracting to audit processes of another company, and one of the processes involved signing e-documents. And then by testing these processes, quite severe vulnerabilities were found. Considering the scale to which EID is used in Latvia, this was quite major. And we worked very hard together with providers of EID software and with developers to have fixes as soon as possible. Later, a lot of effort was put in to coordinate updates for all the software. I think it went quite well. Of course, you can always wish for better, but in general, it didn't go out before there was a fix. There was no major panicking. We tried to explain together with providers, and the message was more or less understood. So this is one of the positive examples that we have, that if people sit together around one table and don't panic, then things can be kept together quite well. Another examples, we have a social portal, and they have had a couple of problems reported, some of them being fixed sooner, some later, but nothing as major as with EID software. Another one with e-banking, already quite old, 3 or 4 years, I don't remember precisely. It affected many banks. It didn't go so smoothly back then. It was 2012, 2013 maybe, I think it was 12. And at that time, a researcher informed us, we informed banks, and there was like summer, 3 months go by. Have you done anything? No. And then only when researchers said, okay, I'm going public in, I don't know, 2 weeks or 3 weeks, only then the panic started that the problem has to be fixed. And the problem was quite serious. Riga city transportation system. Chris mentioned hacking transport cards in the Netherlands. I think people here got inspired by examples from other places and also tried to do stuff here. They found some problems. They reported them, and well, the response was that it is risk that they are accepting, that fixing this risk costs way too much, and considering that it's not so easy to use this vulnerability, the risk is accepted. So there are different examples, and these are just 4. We were trying to count how many such kind of examples we have. I think this year it's at least 20 cases. 20 cases of responsible or more or less responsible disclosure, where we get information from people outside our team. I found this. This looks suspicious, take a look. Sometimes it's something very simple. Cross-site scripting is one of most frequently reported things. Sometimes it's something much more interesting or complicated. And if we look back at our history through all 5 years, of course in the first year it was much less. Together I think we have at least 50 cases for sure, maybe even more. So it's happening. And what is more important, it's not fixed just to the state sector and local authorities, it's anywhere in Latvia. If somebody in Latvia is involved, then we are also involved. So we are middle point not only for a public sector but also for the private sector. And that's a luxury of small country we can manage. If the country is bigger, then of course one team wouldn't be able to manage this. Let's move to another part of all this talk, which is the legal part. And let me be clear, I'm not a lawyer, so all the things I will be talking about law is my understanding of it from the IT point of view and from what I've learned from much more educated people in this area. There are few examples, and Netherlands, of course, is the most well-known regarding responsible disclosure. But in the Netherlands, the system, the legal system is a bit different than we have in Latvia, and there it is possible to have guidelines for prosecutors, and they are taking those into account. In our legal system, it's not possible. You cannot make prosecutors take into account guidelines, only law counts. So even if you would have these guidelines, some prosecutors would choose not to take them into account, and it wouldn't solve the problem. So if we really want to to make difference, we have to have changes in the law. That was what first conclusion to which we came when we started thinking how to actually legalize this ethical hacking, how to make some protection for researcher. So far, no country has a really hard-coded law for responsible disclosure. So there is no example to look at. And that's both good and bad news. Good news is we can be the first ones if we succeed. The bad news is that it's difficult, and we have to go through all those difficulties ourselves. We had, of course, extensive consultation with lawyers. People that are behind this idea, they are either from policy side, from the Ministry of Defense that is very strongly behind this movement, or from CERT, where we are mostly technical experts. Of course, we needed help from lawyers, and I think we got very good help from lawyers. Mr. Oldistinis was involved from the beginning, and he is one of the most knowledgeable lawyers in the country regarding all cyber issues. Of course, we also wanted to know what the ethical hackers community think about it, what is their opinion, how do they see it, what protection would they see sufficient to consider that something is tackled in the law. And we had a couple of people that we consulted on a regular basis. The conclusion was that we would have to change 2 laws to have some effect. First one would be criminal law, and the second one would be IT security law. Firstly, about the criminal law, very shortly, we have several clauses on cybersecurity issues, and it was decided that we would amend one of those laws, which is about access to the system. So it's only about accessing, it's not about changing things. We were also considering amendment to other points, but it was decided that it's too risky. Let's start with one, and then we can go further. And the idea is that there is a clause on professional risk, and this risk can be accepted for greater good. So basically, if something is done because it gives greater good to society, then the liability can be waived. IT security law, that's another story. Let me tell you briefly what this law, what sections this law has at the moment. The law itself is now 6 years old. It established CERT.LV. It gives instructions what to do in case of incident. It gives duties for state institutions, for local authorities. It defines critical infrastructure and also gives duties for those. There is a clause on internet service providers and related other legislation. There is a clause on personal data. The IT Security Council is established. and several other things. And we had amendment to that law in 2015, where a new clause on vulnerabilities was introduced. So we already have a clause on vulnerabilities. At the moment, this clause defines what is a vulnerability, and it says what to do if CERT.LV or an institution finds a vulnerability in their systems. So either institution itself finds something, or CERT.LV finds something, and then we inform institution. So the duties in those cases are set in the law is in force, it's all there. Basically what it says, if the institution finds it, they have to inform CERT and fix it in 90 days. If CERT.LV finds it, it informs institution and they have to fix it in 90 days. 90 days can be extended to 180 days in case of if something cannot be fixed for very good reasons. The fact that institutions are obliged to fix it, it's good. The other side is that there is no penalty if they don't. So of course it's a bit dual situation, but still it's there. It's more than nothing. And now the proposal is to update this clause on vulnerabilities to define responsible disclosure process. I will go through those diagrams to explain the process, how it is envisaged, and what are the problems that we see with it. And this is really a compromise. We had a lot of versions, and they all were heavily amended by lawyers, saying, well, you cannot say this in the law, you cannot say that in the law. It's difficult. And again, since we don't have anyone else to look at, how did they do it, it's even double difficult. So let's go through this process, how we have written it down at the moment. There is a definition, or well, a third party, let's say, to this clause, a third party is introduced. So far we have certain institution that can find vulnerabilities. Now we have a third party that doesn't have a legal access to particular system. Well, I will not quote all the official, the way how it's written. So this third person, let's call it him researcher, him or her, when he or she decides to look for vulnerability and wants to do it in responsible disclosure manner, they have to keep logs to be able to prove what they have done and how they have done it, to prove that they have not done more than needed to prove the vulnerability. So one thing is keeping logs, and it's already quite a burden for a hacker, for a researcher. And the other thing, which is really according to the best practices of responsible disclosure, is that they should access data as little as possible in order to discover the vulnerability. So basically they can copy one sample of data, just one piece of data, but not two. One is enough to prove that there is vulnerability. If they copy two, it's more than necessary, and they are already out of the scope of responsible disclosure. So it's a very thin line, very fine line, and we realize that it's not easy for a researcher as well. But of course, from the legal point of view, from police point of view, they think that it is already way too much. And considering the next point, they have to report about the vulnerability immediately, but not later than after 5 days. So the way how police sees it, that they find a hole, they can exploit it for 5 days, and only then they report to CERT. Of course, from the researcher point of view, it's a different story and a different way how you see it, because first of all, you don't spend all your time on this. Secondly, you are not maybe 100% sure at the beginning, etc., etc. There are a lot of scenarios that are possible. Anyway, when there is a vulnerability, a researcher has logs, and he reports this vulnerability to CERT. CERT is the institution that will check if there is really a vulnerability. There can be, of course, a case when it's a false alarm. Either a researcher is not experienced enough or something else, and it's a false alarm. In that case, CERT reports back to researcher that this is a false alarm. If the vulnerability is there, then CERT is this middle point who informs the institution that is behind this and the researcher that yes, there is a vulnerability and we are starting the process of informing institution and requesting them to fix it. And what I didn't say at the beginning is that this would apply only to the public sector. It is not about private sector. We cannot force private sector into this, no way. It would be just public sector. And it would not even be the critical infrastructure, because critical infrastructure is both public and private. And in Latvia we have this peculiar case where the list of critical infrastructure providers is a state secret. So nobody knows who is on that list. Well, not nobody, but public doesn't know. So we cannot put critical infrastructure here because then people will not know whom they could or whom they could not hack, let's say. Although hack is probably not the meaning that we want to convey here. Anyway, if there is a vulnerability, CERT confirms it's there, and we inform the institution, look, you have a vulnerability in your system. Institution is obliged to fix it in 90 days, or in some cases, it can be prolonged to 180 days. This is written in mind, keeping in mind that the system is local. It has been written by somebody local, let's say, whom you can contact. Can you fix my web page? Can you fix my database? If this is, let's say, vulnerability in Microsoft products, if it's vulnerability in, I don't know, Cisco routers, of course, one Latvian institution will not be that argument why this company will fix it or not fix it. And in case those are big names like Cisco, Microsoft, they most probably will be fixed in these 3 months. In case if it's something small, some Chinese provider of some equipment, it's highly unlikely that in 3 months there will be some result. We had another case study in our conference a few weeks ago where a vulnerability was found in IP security web cameras. And the Chinese vendor was contacted, but all the process to get any reasonable feedback took 9 months. So in 3 months it was undoable. But let's be positive, let's look at examples that are in mind when this proposal is written. So if it's a local system, it should be able to fix it within 3 months. And when it's fixed, institution informs CERT. CERT checks that it's really fixed and informs the researcher. And then after that, researcher can go public with it. If all this process is there, then it's considered responsible disclosure process, and in case somebody still goes to the court, researcher should, the liability should be waived. That's what we have now. It's not easy, it's not very simple for neither of parties, but that's something that we have on the table for the Cabinet of Ministers. It was discussed already 2 weeks ago, and it will be on the agenda again, either next week or 1 week later. I haven't seen the agenda yet for the next week. People are arguing if it's good enough to have it at all. I would say that we have to have something to start with, and then we can maybe improve it later. It's very difficult to be the first ones, and it's very difficult to convince people that are very far from this, that this is actually good, that the intentions are good, and that we all are winners if this is there. We have to talk more with politicians, we have to talk more with police, with others who don't understand the principles behind, and we are doing it a lot, but it takes time. As you know, it's not a straightforward thing. I think in the Netherlands it also took quite a lot of time before they reached the stage where they are now. So to conclude, I would just say that gaining the trust from all parties is the hardest. And there the small country phenomena or situation helps. It helps us, we know people, it helps also hackers, they have examples where we have helped others and they have not been disposed to law enforcement without need or reason. So I hope this will give us some benefit in the future to make it more easy to implement. And I guess this is not last time when I'm speaking about this. It well might be that we have updates to the process, that we have completely different process in place, or we don't have it at all. So I'm sure we'll meet in other events and I can give you some update. So thanks a lot. Do you have any questions? No, yes. To this proposal, we heard feedback that this is way too complicated, that they would not bother.
A lot of it full disclosure and just get rid of it.
Exactly, yes, that's one option. We are trying to convince that, well, that's the way you can be 100% legal. From the other side, from police side, the argument, one of the strongest arguments is that this anonymity is not acceptable at all, that all hackers should register and announce beforehand what they are going to hack. And then if they have a good case, then maybe they are allowed to hack. And we are trying to explain, well, that's not how internet works, you know. Well, I'm sure you understand the situation. Okay, thanks. Yes? Okay, 2 more hands.
You mentioned that niche banking there was a crucial disclosure. In such situations, 30 days actually looks quite a long period, especially when they do nothing. And my data is on my money on this bank, and kind of don't feel very secure in such situations. How do you look for certain sectors, for example, banks or other financial institutions which actually doesn't react adequately in such situations?
Well, as I mentioned, the question was about e-banking and how these periods of reacting or non-reacting would relate to different sectors. My example is at least 4 years old. So we all grown in these years and we understand these processes better. At that point, really the reaction was not as swift as it should have been. But from the legal point of view, it's not regulated. And the only way how we could push it was through the regulators of financing sector. And that also the way how it did work. So when we tried to approach them ourselves, there was no reaction, but through the regulator, it did work. I guess it's one of those not so good examples, but I would hope that it's better now if something happens, because people are more aware. Like Swedbank, who is here, they have processes in place, they know what it is all about. At that moment, I think most people just didn't understand what it is all about. There was some quite long report from a guy they don't know. Who would bother to read it? Well, I have holidays in 4 hours, I'm going off for 2 weeks. And when I come back, this is not my priority either. I think it was something like that.
Sure, I can understand that. But the main question, as I understood, that you have to wait those 30 days. If they don't do nothing, then you can go public. But still, as a user of the bank, my money is still there. So I want to even know that something.
Well, about going public, we had a lot of debate about that with the legal advisors that we had, and they said, well, anyone can go public with anything. It's freedom of speech. You just have to bear the consequences of what you tell. So if you are sued afterwards, you have to be okay with that. And in the case, I imagine, in the case if there is a severe vulnerability in a bank and they don't react, then for greater good, people can decide to go public immediately or after a very short period. I think those are really cases on the extreme ends.
Yeah, my question was that you mentioned that in the national security law, the deadline is like 90 days, but that's only for public sector, not for the private. Wouldn't it make sense in the future to incorporate in the IT security law that those who are in the private sector, but at least in the critical infrastructure, for critical infrastructure objects, you also have to abide to the law?
So the question or suggestion would be that critical infrastructure would also have to fix their vulnerabilities within those 90 days. I think it's a bit controversial because in the current clause for vulnerabilities, the critical infrastructure is included. So in fact, if they have a vulnerability that they found or we found, they have to fix it in those 90 days. If somebody else reports, they don't have to, but it is a bit tricky. I agree, of course, that the critical infrastructure should be forced in one way or another to work with the vulnerability and not to put it just under the carpet.
Say, for instance, that somebody else over the road found something in your country, ethical hacker.
Mm-hmm.
So he reported it to human rights, and now he's here. Does it mean he's going to go into jail, or?
You mean if somebody from another country hacked something, but they reported it in a responsible disclosure way? We discussed this in another context. So the question is about a situation when a researcher is not from Latvia, but the information system is here. And as I understood from the lawyers, then the Latvian law would apply. That means now, when this is not accepted, if company wants to go to court, they can go to court and hacker can be brought to the court, because it's not in the law. If we have those amendments and the hacker can show the logs, etc., good intentions, then it would apply to anyone, not restricted to citizens of Latvia or in any other way. Okay, I think we are running out of time. Thanks a lot. Yes. And the next speaker is Edgars Nots from Swedbank. We mentioned Swedbank already several times in my presentation, so I think it's very interesting to hear the follow-up on this subject. Please, Edgars.
Thank you.